parable of the prodigal son has been called the perfect story. Of course, perfection is subjective, and beauty is always in the eye of the beholder. An obvious question regarding the parable is, where's the mother? Another increasing critique of the parable is the presence of slavery. The subject's starting to dominate academic study of the Bible, the presence of slavery within Holy Scriptures, and that concern will obviously over time filter down to the parish level. Nonetheless, it's an amazing story. One scholar has said it's practically a novella. There's so much going on in this story, and the story is so well crafted. It feels almost like a novella when you're reading it. It's a lot here. It's timeless. I found myself thinking while reading it just now, this never gets old. The words just leap off the page if we're at all aware and awake to what we're hearing. It's as relevant today as it was when Jesus told it. One of the beauties of the parable is we can at different times relate to different characters. Sometimes we may be the prodigal. We know that we've drifted from the path we're meant to tread. Many of us at most times may feel like we're the elder sibling, the one who's always been on time, dutiful, perhaps occasionally taken for granted. And then there's the parent figure, the father figure in the story. Many of us have that experience with biological children. Otherwise, we may think in terms of the role of father or mother. I will never forget, I read a number of years ago, and it struck me at the time, and it strikes me now. I was reading something, I honestly can't remember who or where I found it, or who's the author. But the author made the point about men. You are never the man in your family until your father dies. You'll never be the man in the family until your father dies. My father died in January. He lived a very long life, 88. We're very grateful. What I was thinking in regard to this parable for this homily, my everyday routine has not changed one bit since that day in January, once the funeral was done. And yet everything about my life is different from a different point of view. I no longer am looking over my shoulder thinking, what am I doing wrong? At least I don't have to look over that shoulder anymore. It's a totally different way to be based on one event. And so I see the character of the Father differently after January than I had ever seen it before. I will tell you this also. I was over with my mother earlier this week, and we're going through my father's belongings, and some of it, of course, we're giving away. Some of it just needs to be gotten rid of. So we're going through endless VCR tapes of country music and gospel music and Clint Eastwood, and I came upon a Rubbermaid sort of tote tray. And I opened it up thinking it was more tapes of hee-haw or whatever. I found my Letterman's jacket from high school, perfectly folded, almost reverently kept in a hermetically sealed container. I haven't seen that thing since I was a freshman at Elon College. I put it in a closet when I came back home for Christmas break and have never seen it since. Never thought about it. but there it was. So relationships are complicated, aren't they? But we always are meant to look for the good and to remember to be grateful for those good things that we experience. At different times, this parable conveys different messages. It's in part why it's timeless. Different moments, the parable will give us a different word. I just want to focus in on 2 points in the parable. You can write a book about this parable. You can be a thick book or a little book. You can paint. Some of the great works of Christian art are based on this parable. 2 key moments are this: when the prodigal is at his lowest, instead of giving up completely, he says, Luke tells us, but when he came to his senses, he did not ultimately give up. When he came to himself can also be translated, when he came to his senses, he knew he could at least return home. And then there's that beautiful moment when the father, seeing the son at a distance, runs to meet him. He doesn't wait for the prodigal son to come home in humiliation. The father runs to him. And instead of humiliating the son for his mistakes, he throws his arms around him, loves the son. It's the perfect picture of grace. We also have to remember, even at the very end of the parable, ultimately our homecoming is not in this life. Our ultimate homecoming is to eternity. And the message of the New Testament is we will be met with grace. I came across this truism years ago. This is my final point. A very thoughtful parish priest said, the key to successful parish ministry is this: preach grace and keep the service to an hour. It's perfect advice for a thoughtful parish cleric. Preach grace and keep the service to an hour. The second part has its point and is important. The first part, though, is the message. Preach grace. We're here to hear and receive a message of grace. It's the message we will be met with when we transition from this life to the next. Welcome home. You are loved. Amen.